looked at as a silver bullet to human interaction. Empathy. Empathy is talked a lot about these days, and I just decided here on Starting Out, we want to be more empathetic listeners. So why not share it with the audience? To hear more on empathy and topics such as this, kindly subscribe to my channel, do leave a comment, and find some links in the description that will help open your mind a little bit more on empathy. Empathy, usually confused with sympathy, because sympathy is the first word that we had, and usually sympathy, I think, has a lot to do with seeing a situation and feeling a certain way about it. Bad, that somebody's going through something. Almost pity, like sympathy. But when it comes to empathy, there's a little bit more action involved. Usually it's trying to see things in someone else's perspective. And while you're trying to see something in someone else's perspective, ideally you want to act on it, right? But I use the word trying, mark the word trying to see things in their perspective, because I believe it is not human to actually put yourself in someone else's shoes, to actually feel what they are going through. Because when we were young, it was all about, I'm hungry, I need this, I need that, I want mommy and daddy to give me this and that. But when did we ever stop to think, what does mom need at this point? What does dad need at this point? Like, why was it all about us? I need to get this. That's why it is swimming against the tide, because you're doing something that is not natural to you. But here, Starting Out, we like uphill tasks. In a way, we talk about empathetic listening, because listening allows you to first put your opinion aside and open up to somebody else's opinion. And even in listening, we can find ourselves not being empathetic in our listening. It's talked about even in the 7 habits of highly effective people. I am a bit prone to this, where I listened when I'm just getting ready to give a counter argument to show that I am right. I'm looking for all the flaws in your argument, so that I can take it down and come out on top. But swimming against the tide, I decide that I just want to listen. I just want to first put my opinion aside, and I find myself learning certain things, hearing certain things that if I did not hear, would have culminated into a very big argument, would have probably, I wouldn't have been able to learn that would help me the next time. So listening empathetically to what someone else is going through, usually it involves physical actions like nodding your head, or saying at intervals, giving somebody a hint that you're listening, probably a sound. It usually works on phone, because sometimes you can say a lot of stuff on phone and you don't know if somebody left you on speaker and went to do their own thing. Something that reminded me of that in Henry Danger one time. Who is this Piper, the annoying little sister of Henry, said to him that somebody got a nasty pic of me, and they tagged it. Then he's like, oh no, tell me more. Then he puts it down, and then he just leaves her to shout and yell at the phone. It was hilarious, right? But it is against empathetic listening. So that's what we want to focus on today. You listen more empathetically, and for someone with my character who is always ready to give an argument, I'm happy it's becoming a quieter voice in my head. It's not as loud as it used to be, and that came with practice. I started around my early days of high school, where I didn't only label people as good or evil, black and white, probably generally like this person has no capability of seeing anything good, or they have no capability of doing something bad, but they're working towards it. There are levels that we'll never reach. We might one day, probably towards our death, hit something like almost close to pure empathy, but we will not, because let's say something like girl child education and women's rights, we support it a lot as men. We want to help the ladies come up, because for many years they have been marginalized. But there are certain things about being a woman that we'll never fully empathize with, we'll never fully understand, because we haven't felt them. And since we were young, there are certain things that have been heavily molded in our heads that we also can't get our head fully around in just a couple of years, since they were put in our formative years. They could take decades. Probably something how do they say that word? That word where they get a piece of something from. Nelson Mandela's book has been talked about by Tom Bilyeu, Impact Theory, right? Lovely podcast, lovely video, YouTube channel. So he in particular talked about how Nelson Mandela entered a helicopter or a plane that was being flown by a black pilot, and for an instant he was scared. He quoted it in his book, The Long Walk to Freedom, and I've watched the movies, they're so amazing. But he talked about how, in particular, that little mindset of his, while he had spent 27 years in prison, showed that there's a lot of mind changing to do as Africans and as the world, because there are some things that we can't fully empathize with, but we work hard towards doing. So even for the girls, while we're supporting girl child education, while we're supporting all the women's rights and getting the marginalized out of poverty, etc., we are also saying that we will never fully understand it. And even those who fully understand it might not be fully in the cause, but how can we help? Before we think about why we should have empathy, let's talk about a world without empathy, a world where wars are fought, where families are split because simply there was no empathy. Wars are fought because certain people on different sides will never have no tolerance to listen to each other, and before they can even listen to each other, they are raising arms, shooting each other, and generally we are not getting anywhere. Probably it's also visible a lot here in Africa and in different parts of the world, because this all could have been avoided probably if they listened to each other and talked a little bit and probably had something, probably reached a compromise of what they would have wanted. But we're looking at a world without empathy. We're looking at the families that are split because in certain relationships, in marriages, the husband or the wife or the children are not willing to listen to the other, are not willing to empathize, are not willing to compromise because of what they have probably had somebody else is going through and take a step on. And on both sides, actually, we look at a world we look at a world where there are a lot of cities that were never built, federations that never became here in Africa, just because certain people thought that one's ego was bigger than the other, or one wanted more power than the other, one was given money to make sure that they dethroned the other. We look at the cities that never were. We look at the generally things that never became, the scientific marvels that never became, such as those that are looked at in what we call Tomorrowland. Don't get me wrong, empathy does not mean that everybody agrees with each other, doesn't mean uniformity. They usually say uniformity doesn't also mean unity. But when we come down to think about it, I heavily also disagree with different movements that are there in this world, but sometimes you when you read about them, you get a bit of an insight on what they go through. It reminds you of the time that the early Christians were also fighting to get the gospel out there, and of course they were oppressed, and they had to do a lot of things in order to get the message out, and eventually they changed the world. The people who go through a lot of economic desperation before they get into certain things that are definitely against their will, that are against their well-being, but just because they couldn't do anything and certain people gave large sums of money and took advantage of them, which is why financial freedom is a major goal. As youth is a major goal, is a major belief that we share, that we take on, that we work towards every single day, so that we can eliminate the chances where somebody goes to do something against their will, and we have to actually have empathy that they are not doing this because they actually wanted, but because they were in a very economically desperate position. Climate action, while we are doing everything and saying, leaders should do this, the people down there should understand this, the leaders and the people who are in these activist movements should get an understanding of where each is coming from, where each one's sustenance is coming from, the farmers, because without empathy we can't know how exactly we can change. Everybody will come with their own agenda for the other, and none will actually succeed, and each of them will each leave power at different points of time, or leave the position they're at. They will die and will still be in the same position where nobody wants to listen to the other. It's good to show intense commitment for certain things, but when we listen to people, we get to understand where we need to compromise, but also importantly, they should be able to compromise as well. What does a world of pure empathy look like? The first and most important element is really listening. because listening gives you an opportunity to see what the other person is thinking, and probably sometimes not giving your opinion at a certain point in time is just okay. You can just decide that this point in time I'm going to listen, probably write down some notes, probably think deeply about it, and the next time I can give my counter argument after somebody has let it all out. Because sometimes it's not even about getting a point home, sometimes it's about the feeling of the person at that point in time. I know I am flawed in this particular aspect many times, but knowing that you're flawed is the first step to actually knowing that, this time I should listen, having an internal dialogue about it. And definitely, the more we do it, the more we shall see a society of pure empathy. I would say that there would be less wars if there was empathy in this world, but I trust humanity to get creative with things that they're going to fight about every single day in every single story. But we can comfortably say that all out war between every single human being would be obliterated in some way. Who knows? As we say, all out war would be obliterated, then we also believe that deep held bitterness that has been there over time, over things like slavery, that has been there over things like tribalism, if empathy was an intentional work by hundreds of thousands of billions, all the 7 billion people on earth, that long held bitterness would probably fade away over time as empathy comes in its place. Of course, it would be difficult, but because people are being intentional about it, hundreds of years later, we would see a cleared path from some of that bitterness, or at least it would be so infinitesimal that we wouldn't even be thinking about it. Gary Vee usually says that empathy goes hand in hand with gratitude, and once we have more empathy for others and we realize, we become more grateful about the things that we actually have in our lives, because we are seeing that probably this person doesn't have this, or this person is trying to get to a place that I'm already at, or they've gotten to a place that I want to get to. We shall see that actually empathy is the way to go, gratitude is the way to go, and there'll be more happiness, there'll be more progress. All these things probably sound very utopian in a world that doesn't exist, but what if we tried in our small worlds where we are? Wouldn't it have a very powerful effect, a ripple effect across all the different other worlds around us? Empathy is hard work, no doubt, but if human beings want to achieve what they have never achieved, they are going to have to be able to do what they have never done before. How much are you working on your empathy, and how much is it going to affect those around you? Only you can answer that question, and I believe that by putting out this video in the world, I have put just another drop in the ocean of empathy that will one day fill and engulf every single human being in this world. Subscribe to this channel for more content like this. Stick around for more videos like this. In case you're wondering what's on my shirt, these are just small pieces of Uganda, our lovely country, through a magnifying glass. Just something I thought I'd highlight at the end. But have fun, come enjoy with us starting out every single time that you're online. Subscribe and leave a comment so that we know, what do you think about empathy? Do you think empathy is necessary, or do you think it's just a hoax? Well, we just have to find out. But thank you so much for tuning in this time around. Bye bye.